many of you back. We had so much energy yesterday and excitement around this event, so I'm really looking forward to all of you bringing that excitement and energy back today. I've got my SheetsCon t-shirt on. I have a spreadsheet, asked them about their software. They're all doing really innovative things with Google Sheets, so go and see if it can change the way you think about working with your own data in Google Sheets. Also want to say a quick shout out to some winners of the Swag Bag competition today. So Kang H from California, congratulations. Gwen H from Texas, congratulations. Jessica P from Ohio, and Honey L from New York, congratulations. You've got a t-shirt and some stickers on the way. So folks, you can still enter that, as I said, on the reception page. So we've got another great day lined up for you here at SheetsCon. I'm really excited for all of our speakers today. And just before we start though, one more special announcement for you, a little bit of a surprise for day 2. And that is at 3 p.m. today, we are going to open up some roundtable discussion rooms for you. We're going to set up some discussion rooms on various different topics. And these are video hangout rooms for up to 15 people to participate and be on screen, and hundreds more can watch if you'd prefer to do that. So that's at 3 p.m. folks. We're going to have some really interesting get day 2 started. Really happy to welcome Alex Wilson to the stage with me right now.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
I first came across Alex's work actually when she entered the Tiller dashboard competition. So Tiller's one of our sponsors. They ran a dashboard competition for Google Sheets last year, and Alex was one of the standout entries in that competition. So I reached out to Alex and we got to know each other, and I was really impressed with her work. So I invited her here to come and tell us a little bit about how she builds these solutions in Google Sheets for financial data. So that's what Alex is going to talk about. Please leave your questions in the sidebar for Alex, and we're going to gather all those questions up and answer them. From me for the moment. I will see you again later on. Alex, I'll let you start your presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Hey, everyone. Like Ben mentioned, my name is Alex, and I'm going to start to my sheet, and then I'll come back at the end for questions as well, and we'll take things from there. All right. Now, can everyone see my screen share okay? If you can give me like a yes in the chat box. So that could mean very different things to different people. You know, maybe you're working on budgeting, maybe you're working on tracking your net worth, or maybe you want to look into like investment allocation analysis. The way we're not going to get that complex today. So, you know, who can use Google Sheets to master? Just talking about custom Google Sheets, right? Most people here are probably not template type people, right? You know, if you're nerding out in Google Sheets, maybe you, you know, are not that template type person. But what we can build on in Google Sheets are, you know, budget and cash flow, bill tracking, debt payoff and planning, savings tracking, and then the more complex things like investments and retirement projections. Now, why would you want to use Google Sheets, right? It's a blank slate, right? It's custom to you, and it adapts as needed for your situation, right? So let's say I build a Google Sheet out for myself. I'm married, have one child, like maybe 5 years from now, that Google Sheet doesn't support my needs anymore. But the great thing about building it out yourself is that you're able to, you know, adjust it. Endless opportunities, and that's a good thing, but also it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, right? So, you know, especially when you're trying to build out like a dashboard or something that you'll use to track, you know, something as important as your money. So I suggest kind of taking a step back before you actually dive into, there we go, that are paid. Maybe a 3-month future cash flow review and net worth and income statements by year for 10 years or something like that. And then what are your like to have sections? What are things that you just want to have in there, but you don't necessarily need? So things like subscription tracking or real-time historical cash flow for the past 3 months, or tabs separate. Don't try to put your, right? You got to pull in your transaction history. And, if you're using like a checking and a credit card, you want to make sure you're pulling in both. Otherwise, you're going to be grossly underestimating how much you're spending in certain categories, right? So we do want to have some method to be pulling that in. Like I said, maybe it's through Tiller where that pulls it in automatically for you, or you're uploading it through a CSV or something like that from your bank, or you're just manually entering that in maybe once a week or something like that. All right, so then the next one would be debt and savings balances and a method to update those as well. So again, and then also maybe having a section for assumptions. If you are going to be doing some projections in here, it's good just to put those annual rates of return somewhere where you can quickly update them, and then you can link your formulas to this one much simpler. And then finally, if you're doing any sort of income projections, I would definitely advise pulling in the tax tables and, just other things to look up. So, I pulled in the married filing joint tax table for 2020. Pro tip here, so if you're doing when you have a tax table, you'll probably end up doing like a VLOOKUP or something on it. And, when you look at the tax brackets themselves, it'll say like 0 to 19,500. So I would just sort it like this to where it's the lower limit. So when you're doing your VLOOKUP, it's just looking for the next lowest basically line there, and then you can look up the different rates and then what to add in. All right, so I suggest just being really simple here and just having a dashboard kind of like this. Maybe I want my net income, total expenses, and income minus expenses. I want to see my upcoming bills, and I want a section for savings contributions and debt payments, right? So super simple. This is just in general kind of how I'm thinking about how I want to lay this out. Now the next step is to build it out, right? So this might be a little overwhelming at first, but we're going to dive into each section, right? So let me get the right zoom in level. That works well. Okay, great. All right, so this is what I took from my draft dashboard and I turned it into my actual dashboard, right? So if we look at the top here, I've got my budgeted income, my budgeted spending and savings, and then what's left over in my budget. Now, the way I think about budgeted spending and saving, these are my fixed bills, my debt payments, and my contributions to savings. The way I think about leftover in budget are for my what we call flex expenses. So things like groceries, gas, personal shopping, just anything else is what I consider what's left over. And we'll get into a breakdown of that as well. So the first one up top, this black one, is just for like my budgeted amount. And then in my dashboard, and of course yours could be very different, but this is just how I would build it out. I'm basically starting with what does March look like. So this is what's quote unquote budgeted, and this is what's actually happening down below. And I really like just putting in dates for starting and end date. So let's say once it gets to April, I can just change this to April, and everything will adjust when it's time. All right. Now the same breakdown from up above, I have my net income, my expenses, and then my leftover. So my net income, what I'm doing is that I'm actually doing a sum if with an S from my inputs page. So if we go over there now, you notice on my transaction history and method to update here, I've listed out all my transactions. And typically when you import or you download from a CSV, you can see if it's like a debit or a credit, right? So what I'm having that formula do is just sum up all of the credits. So this would be a credit here. And I'm telling it to look for the dates as well. So the B column on that inputs is for my date of the transaction. And I want it to be greater than my starting date up above, but less than or equal to my ending date. So it's basically just telling me the net income for this period, right? And then same for expenses, it's just looking for debit instead of credit. So this is telling me not been paid yet. So that matches up there. I've got the actual amount that I've spent. So that's the expenses that I've already gone through. And then my upcoming bills, we'll get into that section down below, the amount that I still haven't saved, but I've planned to save, and then sending to debt that I haven't sent yet, and savings for future expenses we'll get into as well. So this tells me the flex amount that I have left over for the month. So when we, break that down, I like to look at it as a weekly number, right? So I have a formula running up here that's telling me it's roughly basically the leftover amount, the difference between today and the end date of this period, and then getting it to a weekly number. Oops, there we go. All right. And I think it's always helpful to have a net worth snapshot, and we'll get into how I'm doing these projections for 1 year in the future, and then also seeing like what impact I'm having on my net worth over the course of this year based on what I've planned out, I think is always helpful to see as well. All right, so income is our first section. So when things have been paid, so I like to just use this for tracking it. Now, if you notice up here, notice that leftover is $2,500. If I uncheck something, it jumps up, right? Because then it's saying that that money is still coming in, and that it has not been included on my transaction summary yet. Now, for gross to net income, this can get really, really complicated really quickly. And so I wouldn't suggest this for everyone, but if you are someone that's a little more technical and you really want to dive into how your gross income, goes down to your net income and just visually see that breakout, we can use a section like this. So I've got, person one and person two, this is their gross salary, maybe they're contributing to their 401k, got HSA contributions, health, vision, dental. We're getting down to their adjusted gross income, which is just their gross income minus all those pre-tax deductions, right? And then I'm figuring out, their federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. And then also, any after-tax deductions for things like maybe a Roth 401k or something like that. I really like seeing these in an annual format, and then also over here as a monthly format as well. Now, if we have time, we can come back up and get into how I'm figuring out taxes here, but I want to save that for later so we can get into, more of the dashboard down below. Okay, great. So now I mentioned that I wanted a bill tracker, right? So I consider bills things like your fixed bills. I don't want you to include debt payments or savings in here because we're going to do that down below. So things like rent, water, electric, gas, auto insurance, whatnot. So I like to keep this fairly simple so it's easy to view. So I've got just the bill, the day it's due on, the amount of the bill, and then I like to have a scheduled box here. So this isn't linked to anything. It's just for me personally. So I can know if this has already been scheduled. So if I have it on auto pay, right, I can just, keep this checked and not have to worry about it. But if it's something I manually pay, I want to make sure it's unchecked until I actually schedule that bill. Now, same thing for up above. I've got this paid box linked to that leftover. So if we go back up here, we've got the $2,500. And then if I uncheck one of these, so let's say the big one so we can actually see, it's now going to reduce that amount because that tells me that I still have to pay that bill. So I don't actually have that money free. It's already been kind of earmarked for that bill. So I'll recheck it because we're going to assume it's already been paid. And then non-monthly expenses. So these are things that don't come up every month, but they are, things that will impact your cash flow, right? So, things like vacations, things like auto maintenance, maybe you pay your auto insurance on every 6 months instead of monthly. So I think it's really important to go ahead and track these things as well. And also I can mark them off if they've already been saved for it. So I've got, how much do I need? When do I need it? And then my formula is running just to tell me how many months away is that, how much I've allocated. So you'll notice down below, in our savings section, count, how much of that I'm saving towards this, beach trip or whatever. And then also I have this function running. So we've got the first one is, my needed amount minus the savings that I've allocated divided by the number of months away. So that tells me how much do I need to save a month from now until April 20th to make sure like I meet that goal. And then it's just choosing the min of either that amount needed minus the savings allocation. So in this case, that would be 0. So I can check that off that that's been saved for. And then down below, so this one tells me I need $338. I need to save that every month to be able to save up for this big family trip in June of 2022, right? Now, flex spending. So this is that what's left over from up above, basically this amount here and here. So like I mentioned before, these are for your things like groceries, eating out, transportation, shopping, anything that's not accounted for in your bills or your future expenses, right? So this is where we can kind of track, I have $1,000 a month I need to spend on groceries, and eat out maybe $250 a month, and transportation and shopping. And then for the actual, it's just doing again a sum if from to that actual above, sum up the total amount for that category, right? And then again, if you have a credit card, you want to do this again for that transaction history, right? And then this just gives me a real-time difference, so I can kind of track how I'm doing. And I can see where I might be at risk for going over, or I have a lot more room to spend on things like that. And then also I've got the total budgeted for the entire month from up above, and then the amount that I've left over just for a quick tracking. Like if I want to enter in something else here, it'll adjust for me and tell me how much I kind of have left. And then I like having a savings section. So this is where I'm pulling in the current savings balance from my input page. So over here, I've got, this is where I put in the debt savings balance and method to update, right? So I've got my current balances up here. And then all I'm doing at the end of each month, to keep it simple, is I'm just pasting it down here. I mean, I know there's better ways to do that, but for me, keeping it simple, I just like to be able to quickly glance and see kind of what the balance is, and then, just paste it down here for older months. I've got how much I'm saving into that account in my estimated annual rate of return. Again, if you have that on your input page, you can link back to it. But if you're not going that complex, then I suggest just writing in, the rate of return there. Now, one of my favorite formulas here are future value. So future value is telling me basically that $65,000 that I have, what is it going to be worth in a year based on how much I'm saving into it and my rate of return. So a couple of tips here, if you're looking at a, basically the future value function, you want to make sure that you put your rate in the same period that you're trying to compound it by, right? So this rate that I put in is 6%. And I'm trying to look at, I'm saving $500 a month, so I can't do 6% a month. That would be quite a large annual return. So I need to take the 6% and divide by 12. And then my next one is to put in the number of periods. So I'm going to say I want 12 months from now. And then my payment amount. So that tells me in 1 year, my 401k could possibly be worth roughly almost $76,000. Now, I think future value is fine to use for short periods of time. I would not run this out for 30 years or even 40 years because, number one, the rate of return here is a flat rate of return. We don't know that we will actually earn that over 30 years. And I think it gives you like a false number especially if you're making decisions off of that number. So I think, again, future value is fine for your, 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years. But once you get past that, it becomes too hypothetical and probably too large than what it will actually end up to be. And also, I don't know if I'll be saving $500 a month every month for the next 40 years, right? All right, and then for each one, so for things that come out of my paycheck, I want to make sure that they're not being double counted because my net income will already be reduced from these. So I've just removed that paid checkbox from here so that, you know, I'm not including in there too. But for things that I am paying after my paycheck, I can put them in here. And once they're paid, I can check them off and it will go ahead and adjust my leftover money. All right, same for debt. So let's say I have a few credit cards, auto loan, personal loan. I put in the balance, my monthly payment, the rate, and then the weighted average rate is really good for figuring out how much, you know, basically across all of your debt, what is the average rate of return on or not average rate of return, excuse me, average interest rate on all of your debts, right? So in this example, that's 7.6%. So even though I have some that are really high interest rates and some that are lower, this tells me on average for all of my debt, I'm paying 7.6% a year on that. Now for paid off, this is doing an IMPER function. So IMPER is just for number of periods, basically. So it's very similar to future value. So here I'm going to again do the rate divided by 12, the payment amount linked there, the present value, and it's negative because this is a debt, right? And then this is positive because I'm paying down the debt. And then future value, I want to know when it's paid off, right? So IMPER is going to spit out a number of months. So I want to know the actual month and year that this is paid off. So I'm going to multiply that by 30.5 to get it to days, roughly. And then I'm going to add it to today. So J14 up there is where my today date is. And that'll give me the estimated paid off date. And then also, again, I'm running that future value to show in 1 year, you know, what is this worth? What is the balance on this account? And then also I've got scheduled and paid. So again, if these are on auto pay, I can just check them all off. But if I have things, again, that I manually pay, like maybe this credit card I manually pay, so until it's paid, I'll leave it unchecked. So down below here, I have some interesting, you know, summations. You know, total amount owed is fine, total payment's fine. And then, you know, we have our weighted average rate. Now for the paid off date, if you notice up here, December 21st is not up here anywhere. So why is it saying that I can pay off all my debt by December 2021? So basically this function down here, this IMPER, is the same function as up above, but it's basically saying for the next, I don't know, is that a year and a half, year and 9 months roughly, I'm sending that $1,500 to all of my debt. So the paid off one up here is just assuming that, you know, I'm just paying that minimum payment until this debt's paid off and I'm not rolling it into the next one. But this one down here is really telling me if I continue paying that $1,500 a month, this is when all of my debt will be paid off. And then also the total balance of my debts in 1 year, roughly. All right, so another important section I think to add to your dashboard is what I call a sandbox. And this is just where you can put in all the random formulas. So I'm sure we've all created Google Sheets that have these one-off, you know, formulas or calculations running somewhere in the sidebar, or like as Ben got mad at me on the Tiller competition, you know, in white text with a white background. So I started adding in this sandbox section, right? So if I just want to do some random calculations, like, I don't know, doing an average of some numbers or something, I can do it in here, and then I know it's safe to probably delete those to keep it neat and clean. So I'm going to zoom out for a second so we can see this, you know, as a whole. And I know that's really, really hard to see. Hold on, maybe that's a little better. So in general, my sections for my dashboard are, you know, what are my budgeted amounts, what's actually going on this month, the income, getting from my gross income to my net income, a bill pay tracker section, you know, non-monthly expenses, my flex spending, so things like my groceries, eating out, savings tracking, debt tracking, and then a sandbox. Now I would consider this one of the more simpler dashboards. Of course, you can get a lot more complex And I'll go over some of the formulas that you can use to, make this a little more complex if you do have a little bit different situation. And I have those down here. Okay. So in general, some of the formulas that I really like, I've got some if and some ifs with an S. So that's, we use that to sum up transactions based on a category or, maybe a store or something like that. Like I want to know how much I spent at Target in the past month, something like that. And then count if. So I can use this to count how many times I went to a store in a month, right? So let's say I assume that I go to the grocery store once a month or once a week, excuse me. And so I can use this to quickly figure out, maybe I'm actually going 1.5 times a week or something like that. And then average if we can use to figure out what is the average bill every time I go to the grocery store, right? So let's say I assume that I spend $100 every time I go because it feels like that when I go to the grocery store. But I can use this to actually figure out what that is. And then that's very useful for planning out your budget as well. So let's say I'm about to run out the door to the grocery store and I'm like, mentally I'm thinking I've got $100 to spend, but maybe in reality I actually spend like 125 or end up spending a little less, like 75. I can kind of adjust my assumptions, just based on knowing what I actually typically do. All right, so now I'm going to go over these time value of money functions. These are probably the most helpful when doing things with money in Google Sheets, right? So INPER is one that we've used before as well, but we've got the rate of return, and again, bringing that back to the period that you're using for your compounding, right? And then this is a monthly payment amount into that. Present value, so let's say I have $2,000 now, I'm saving $200 a month, and I want to know how long is it going to take me to save $4,000. So this is a negative because I'm going to take out $4,000. So this tells me that it's going to take 9.327 months to save that $4,000. Now let's say another version of that question is, I want to know what payment that I need to make to save $4,000 in 9.327 months, right? And I'm using the same numbers here so we can, just run through different versions of the same question, right? So again, same rate of return. I'm going to use number of periods as 9.327. I currently have $2,000, and my future value again is negative because I'm going to pull out the $4,000. So that tells me that I need to save $200 a month to have that $4,000. Now, present value. So let's say I know I need $4,000 in 9.327 months, and I can save $200. I can earn 6% on that. And then, again, we're going to use that same number of periods. This will tell me how much do I need to save right now in order to reach that goal. And we know from the examples above, it'll be the 2,000. And then future value. So now we're getting the future value of a dollar amount. So we have the rate of return, the number of periods, the monthly payment, and then the present value. So this will tell me that in 9.327 months, if I pay $200 a month and I have $2,000 now, my future value that I can take out is $4,000. All right. Now, some other formulas that are really helpful, your general VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, if error, especially when you're running some of these functions up here, it's good to wrap them in if error. And then if, and or are just always handy to know and have. So I'll use a lot of if statements in the spreadsheets that I build out, and sometimes nested if statements and things like that. So a few final tips that I have for y'all, and I'll open it up for questions. The first one is just to be thoughtful when you're designing and organizing your sheet. Really take a step back before you actually just start diving in and think about what you actually need, how you want to have it organized. And then also keep that input separate from your dashboard and make it pretty and something you want to actually use. Hide those grid lines and create a guide to help you use your own sheet. So for example, Ben mentioned this in the one that I entered in the Tiller Challenge. My first page was a guide, like a how-to guide, right? How to actually work through this dashboard and get it set up and use it on a monthly basis, right? So for this one, I might say, well, first step is make sure all your transactions are updated, and then also make sure that you enter in, all of these sections down here, make sure they're filled out. And then on an ongoing basis, you're making sure that you're marking things paid and scheduled and whatnot. So, even though you're building this for yourself, you can use, that guide to remind yourself. Let's say you don't pick this up for 3 months or something, you can use that to remind yourself how to use your own sheet. So that is basically it for my presentation. Now, I know we still have about 20 minutes left. So in the chat box, if you want to drop in something that you want me to build, we can try to build something in real time, on here. Whether it's like a calculation, something around personal finance, please don't make me do something outside of personal finance, but we'll switch over to that now. And I know there's a lag too, so I apologize if it's quiet for a minute. Oh, one question I do see coming up is how I design these. So in general, I like to make sure I'm using the same font. So in this example, I'm using Poppins, a really popular font right now. And also for my headers and things like that, I'm making sure they're the same size, that they're kind of spaced the same, they're aligned the same. And then I like using a fun pop color. So like on my Tiller challenge, I used like a nice orange color. Here I'm using this light blue that I really like. And so, I think just, oh, another tip, also for your lines, I like making these a little bit thicker. I just think they look better. So I'll switch it to this, I guess 3-point thickness, and then using like a gray color on them, I just think makes it look very nice as well. You want to make sure that you're using white space, and it just helps, frame things out on there. And very limited use of charts, I would say. Sometimes in personal spreadsheets that I'll get from clients, there's charts everywhere. And I think sometimes it's a little distracting from what's actually going on. So if you are going to be building a chart in there, just being very methodical about, is this actually needed? And things like that. Let's see. Also, I like doing this in vertical format, so it's like a scrolling format. This is very helpful if you're trying to pull it up on your phone as well, or like an iPad. I'm using a big monitor right now, but maybe I want to pull this up on my phone. It's easier if it's in that vertical format. If I'm on a smaller computer, it's just much easier instead of scrolling horizontally. Let's see, any other questions that come in here?
Hi,
Great. All right. Hi, Ben.
Hi. I'll read some of these questions out for you so that you can. Because it's very hard to find them otherwise in the chat for you.
Okay.
We had a question said, do you have any suggestions for automating and organizing scanned receipts? So, working with paper receipts, they're kind of tricky, aren't they?
Yeah, they are very tricky. I personally use a Google folder. So I'll have like my dashboard in this Google folder, and then we have another folder maybe for scanned receipts, and then we've got another folder for taxes and things like that, and all of that is shared with my husband. But I personally have not dived into, maybe importing those in or something like that.
Yeah,
So
I know that Excel actually recently, maybe within the last 6 months, launched a feature where you could take a photo of a receipt and it would read, I mean, as best it can, it would turn that into actual data. And I think it works pretty well. It's not, totally fail-safe. So, we'll see how that works.
Great.
Another question that's just come in: do you use any conditional formatting in your dashboards?
Sometimes, yeah.
Any tricks there?
So, yeah, let me share my screen again. Give me just a second. Switch over. Okay, y'all can see my screen again. Okay, great. So I've got, let's say, for example, I want this leftover to be like a bright red when it's negative or something. So I can use conditional formatting for that. So I'll go to Format, Conditional. I want to say is less than 0. Let me zoom in here so we can see. Okay, can y'all see better now? Let's see. There we go, much bigger. So I'll say if it's less than 0, and I want to use a custom format. So let's say I want to keep the white background, but now I want it to be an ugly red text. Oh, and again, make it bold. So let's just say, for example, this -300. Now it's very clear, like, oh, I've gone over. Or let's say, maybe it's not 0. Maybe I say, well, if I get down to $200 left, I want it to be big, red, and bold, and kind of stand out and say like, oh, I got to be careful. I don't have much left.
Great. Yep. And then what about, another question was, how do you keep track of archived data essentially when, as your data grows, if you keep the same dashboard for many years, eventually the data starts to get so big. Do you have a strategy there for do you move that data into a different sheet or?
Yep. So I personally have had a spreadsheet that has gotten so slow because I've used it for now 11 years.
Wow.
So what I'll do is I'll move the old transactions into another sheet and then do something like an import range or something, or I'll run the analytics on that other sheet and then import the calculations into the results, one, so it's not running all of it on that.
Yeah, that's a great tip actually. So if your data does get too big, and you can have separate sheets for each year, and then as Alex said, you can even then do a little bit of analysis in each of those separate sheets, and then bring those summary results through to your master dashboard, if you like, using the import range to keep that one nice and lightweight, so you can easily read that. Okay, great.
I noticed someone said same spreadsheet for 11 years. So yes, but it doesn't look the same as it did 11 years ago. It looks very different than it did then.
What about one more question here is, do you use the goal seek feature in Google Sheets at all? Have you tried that one?
I have not tried it. I used it in Excel when I used to use it, but honestly, I haven't in Google Sheets yet. But I can see where that'd be very helpful.
Yep.
Saying like kind of a different version, I guess, the payment or in per present value or future value you can use.
Yeah, exactly. It's allowing you to set that target, if you like, and then adjusting the inputs to see how they can get you there. So the goal seek feature was an add-on that Google published themselves about 6 months ago, folks. So it's a nice little analysis tool there, actually, so worth checking out.
Yeah.
Let's see what else I've got here. When you've built these dashboards, Alex, what have you found to any times, things that have slowed them down and made them hard to use? Sort of anything to avoid, would you say there?
Yeah, when you're running a ton of complex analysis, so some of my like investment allocation analysis or retirement projections might get really bogged down.
Right.
Just because all the math that's having to be run. So again, a couple things we can do there, and what I have actually done is I found sometimes you do need outside software for things like that.
Yep.
So maybe I'll run analysis in a different software and then pull in my inputs.
You're not telling us that the Google Sheet is not the answer, are you?
It's part of the answer, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's I like it. I like it. It's always part of the answer.
Yeah.
I like that.
And even with our clients, so like I use Google Sheets for all my deliverables. So I'll pull in something from the robust planning software, bringing it into Google Sheets, and then making it pretty and using it there. So.
Okay, great. And when you just mentioned then that you share, you use Google Sheets to share these financial plans with clients and things. How do you do that? Do you share with edit access? Do you let them just have view only, or do you share publish to the web? I mean, sort of what's your strategy there for?
Yeah, so that's more on the coaching side for us. So for especially with the budgeting and things like that, we'll share like with edit access basically to a client within their own folder, so they can update that in real time. And we find that really helpful when we're on the phone too, so we know we're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
And then we use that. Oh, good. Sorry.
Go on.
I was gonna say we use that in conjunction with our mobile app. So like that's kind of the outside software that's doing some more on the analysis and tracking and whatnot. And we're using that sheet together.
So you empower your clients to actually be in that sheet with you and doing some doing some of that work as well. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and the important part of coaching is like we're not doing it for them, for our clients, right? So they kind of have to have those tools and guidance from us, and that's what I find the shared sheets really useful for doing something like that.
Great. So a few things I took away from your presentation, Alex. I mean, first of all, it's a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
But I was just really, seriously impressed there with the design skills you showcased on those sheets. I mean, they look, absolutely top drawer, amazing. So,
my secret is just to hide the grid lines.
Hiding the grid lines is a top tip, actually. Everyone should do that. Design your whole dashboard, and then at the very last second, hide the grid lines as like a sort of gift to yourself, and it's really a wonderful moment. One thing I was going to say is that I use Google Sheets, and my family, we use Google Sheets as well to manage our own household budgets, and we track our spending and just see if we can keep on within our budgets, and then that helps us project where we'll be by the end of the year, and allows us to see what we have for savings and things like that. So, and we actually use a tool called Tiller, which is one of our vendors here, and they automatically bring in. You can connect your banks to your Google Sheet, so that data just feeds directly into your Google Sheet automatically. Every day, you just get a new log of your transactions, of what you spent. And then there's really no hiding. Once you've linked up all your personal accounts, you can't get, you can't hide anything then. But it really gives my wife and I a tremendous insight into, our finances, and it's allowed us to really keep on top of that. And we're all striving for goals in life, and I think that you might have, having financial goals will allow you to then achieve the goals you want in life, whether that's to retire early, to spend more time with the kids, to buy a new car, whatever it is that you like. And so if you have a plan to get there, it's more likely to happen than if you just leave it to chance.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is that it's not about more money, it's about living life on your terms, right? And so I think creating these custom sheets, it's all part of, for me at least, just creating the awareness and the framework, so I can build out what am I trying to work towards, and just knowing that it's not all about this money. It's just, this is my tool.
Yes, exactly. It's a tool, isn't it?
I want to live my life.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, Alex, thank you again. That was a really wonderful presentation. Tons of value, amazing design skills, and thank you very much for presenting to us today.
No problem. I'll try to go hang out in the networking section as well later today.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, there you go, folks. Go and check that out. So, folks, we'll take around about 7 or 8 minute break. Let's go and all get charged up with a cup of coffee, and we'll be back at 11 with Laura Taylor, who's a Google developer expert, and she's going to come along and talk to us about how we can automate some of the tedious stuff we have to do in Sheets by using AppScript. So really excited about this talk, and we'll see you in a few minutes, folks. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.